wound up eventually improving their economic circumstances, and they moved out. They moved out of many of the cities. The city didn't do that for black people. Black people were sort of stuck here, and we were poor, and we were not given the opportunities that had been given to many of the groups that had come before us. And so we were sort of left here. At that point, we were losing ground all over the country. As the film points out, we were being discriminated against, not just in the South, we were discriminated against in the North also. And so in 1971, the year before this convention took place, there were a group of us from around the country, and we started to meet. And one of the things that I take away from that is that when we don't communicate with each other, when we don't talk to each other, when we don't try to understand what each other is going through, we sort of think we're the only ones, and we are not able to organize in order to meet the challenges that we face. We did that in 1971. And we did it in a way, very frankly, that has not happened since that time. Because as was pointed out in the film, this was a gathering of people who considered themselves nationalists. Now at that time, nationalist was a euphemism for militant, for I'm not going to take it, and if you slap me on one cheek, I'll slap you on the other. And nationalists considered themselves people who had a right to live and be treated equally in every possible way, and were not willing to wait. Amiri Baraka was a nationalist. There were a number of nationalists that participated in those meetings in 1971. Then, in addition to that, there were what Baraka called the stars. And those were the mainstream black folks, like me. And they would call us, they say, oh, you're elected. If you run and you hold a public office, you have sold your people out. That was the attitude at that time. So that was another group. That was another group of people that participated in this convention. And then finally, there were those who really were not either. They were one side. They were not completely on one side, and not completely on the other side. And that's what I tried to be. That's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be kind of in between. And so as a consequence, in these meetings that were taking place all over the country, we had one out at O'Hare Field, at a hotel out at O'Hare Field. We had another one in Atlanta. I remember the one in Atlanta, we were up on the top floor of this hotel, and there was windows all the way around this room that we were meeting with. And we'd been there maybe an hour talking. Many of the heads of black organizations from around the country. And we began to hear this helicopter circling around. And it just kept circling and circling around. And obviously they were photographing each of us in those rooms, and in that room. And we found that to be the case no matter where we went in the country to meet. It was almost impossible to meet secretly because one way or the other, they always seemed to find out where you were meeting, and they always showed up. But we went forward anyway and held those meetings. We had some in Washington, D.C. We had some around the country. And in one of those meetings, the question came up, well, we know what we have to do. We know we need to come together. We need to have a meeting of black people all over the United States. We need to bring people from all over the United States. And we need to sit down and make a plan, make a strategy. At least we talked about the next 10 years. What is it that we, as a group of people in this country, oppressed people in this country, what is it that we want to achieve or accomplish over the next 10 years? And so we knew we wanted to have this meeting. The problem was we didn't know where we could have such a meeting. The truth of the matter is that none of the cities in this country wanted to see thousands of black people coming to those cities because they assumed, I mean, remember we had just come out of the 60s where we had so-called riots, and we all know they were not riots. They were just people rebelling against the condition that they were living under. And so none of the cities want to have everything. In this meeting, we sort of went around the room and said, well, why don't we have it in Chicago? Oh, no, we can't have it there, David. He's not going to let you do that. That's not going to happen. So every city that came up, there was some reason for not having it in that city. And so finally, I just said, well, if you don't want to have it anywhere else, you can have it in Gary. We can have it in Gary because at least we know that in Gary, we have some control over what goes on and what is going to happen. And so everyone said, great, let's go to Gary. Let's go to Gary. It was an incredible thing. People came from Mississippi, for example, could not afford a plane ticket, could not afford a train ticket, could not afford a bus. Many people came from Mississippi and other states in the South. They hitchhiked to get to Gary, but they got here. And we had a little fundraising. We were really fortunate to have some of the biggest stars in the country at that time that were willing to work with us, like Harry Belafonte, Dick Gregory, and some others. And so we were able to raise some money. And some of the money we used to help to pay for bus tickets, to pay for people so that they could get to Gary, because we wanted everyone to be represented at that meeting. We wanted people from every state, a delegation coming from every state to come to that meeting. And we wanted that meeting to be an open meeting. And so the question arose because at that time, Angela Davis was having her problems. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, people did not want to be seen in the same town with Angela Davis, much less in the same building. And so there was quite a discussion back and forth about that. Well, should we invite Angela Davis? And of course, I always, and since I'm the one telling the story, I can say this. So I spoke up again, and I said, it's our meeting. We'll decide who comes, not the newspapers, not somebody outside these meetings. It's our meeting. And so Angela Davis is our sister. She is welcome to come to this meeting. And so sure enough, she came to that meeting. And then the question came up, well, are we going to have any mainstream media people covering the meeting? The decision was made, no, we're not. As a matter of fact, the decision was that if the mainstream media wanted to, like ABC, NBC, and so forth, that if they wanted to have someone cover that meeting, then they should hire some people of color to work for them. Absolutely. And if they couldn't do that, they couldn't cover it. Absolutely. And so it was our meeting. I mean, that was the first really unique thing about it. It was our meeting. Whatever happened there, we were in charge. We were making that decision. Hard to appreciate today, but at that time, that was almost a radical notion, that a group of black people could come together and decide for themselves what they wanted to do, who they wanted to have in that meeting, what kind of actions or activities would take place in that meeting. And so we had this meeting. Frankly, up to that point, if you go back and look at biblical history, look at the history of the black church in the United States, you'll find that there were a few times when some denominations of the black church brought together large numbers of people, very large numbers of people, many times to protest the way black people were being treated in this country. And and for other reasons they came together. But I have to tell you, up to that point, up until 1972, there had never in the history of this country been a meeting, a black political gathering of that size, of those proportions. And the film says 8,000. We were sure there were more than 10,000 people that came to that meeting. So it was the largest black political gathering in the history of the United States. And to be honest with you, there hasn't been one since. There hasn't been one since. So the truth is that it was unique in that regard. Now, in addition to some of the criticisms that were received, because as the film says, all black people in the country did not think this was such a wonderful idea at all. 1972, another very historical event was taking place. Shirley Chisholm was running for president of the United States. We had never had anyone that had the temerity, the audacity to run for president of the United States, and she was a woman. She was a woman, and at that time that was thought, wow, unheard of, unthought of, and yet Shirley Chisholm ran the first serious campaign for president by a black person in the history of this country. She ran that for president, 1972. So everyone, of course, said Shirley has to come to Gary, has to come to the convention. She has to be a part of this, and so Shirley, her campaign staff put out a statement that she would not be at Gary. Wow. And frankly, she was not alone. A number of members, black members, at that time we had 10 black members of the U.S. Congress. A number of them said they wouldn't be there either. Wow. They were not going to be seen. The head of the NAACP said he wasn't going to be seen on the same stage with Amiri Baraka and some of those other bomb-throwing folks who didn't represent black people anyway. And so Shirley was not coming. She was not coming. I called her the night before the convention, and I tried to urge her to come. I said, Shirley, if you come to this meeting, I said, the people there, thousands of people there, they will applaud you. You're running for president. You're the first one running for president. But she said, oh, Mayor, the people that on my staff tell me that if I go to Gary, if I come to that meeting, that what if I'm rejected by my own people? That will be the end, of my presidential campaign, because she can't even get her own people to support her. And she said it would just be too much of a risk for me to come to that meeting. Now, I talked to Shirley Chisholm after that, sometime after that, and she deeply regretted the fact that she did not come to Gary, because she would have been tremendously, the place would have gone up in smoke if she had walked in. But the fact is that there was a member of Congress, a black member of Congress, who came. The Sheraton Hotel right down here was open at that time, open and operating. And there was a member of Congress who came to Gary because there were mixed feelings about all of this. And he checked into the Sheraton Hotel. I won't mention his name. I can tell you he was from St. Louis, yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, I can.
Not that guy.
His last name, I don't want to be too obvious here.
I know
But his last name was the same as the last name of a former mayor of the city of Gary. His last name was Clay.
That's right.
Last name was Clay. He represented the city of St. Louis in the Congress of the United States. He came, he checked into that hotel. The convention went on for 4 days. He never came out of his hotel room. He never came out to West Side. He just wanted to be able to say, I was in Gary when that convention, but he did not want to be there where someone might take a picture and all that and take it back. And there were a number of them that had that feeling. Vernon Jordan was the head of the National Urban League at that time. Vernon Jordan came to Gary. He felt he had to come to Gary. But Vernon came out to West Side. He came out to where the convention was taking place. But Vernon he stayed behind the stage. He never came up on the stage. Now just think of some of the people. I mean, Coretta Scott King, the widow of Dr. King, was sitting on that stage. Betty Shabazz, the widow of Malcolm X, was sitting on that stage. I mean, there were some incredible people sitting on that stage. But Vernon felt that his board, the National Urban League board, would not appreciate seeing pictures of him, with many of these people that were at this convention. Roy Wilkins told the New York Times at the beginning of the week that no, he was not coming to that meeting because the people there were radical. They were radicals, and they did not represent what black people in the United States really thought at that time. So there were some very mixed feelings in that regard. The convention itself, and I have to say this about Gary, especially as we look at our city today and sort of compare it to where it was then. And that is just this. There was an incredibly different spirit
That's right.
that existed at that time. Basically, black people at that time had this feeling that they could do anything. They could overcome anybody. They were not afraid to stand up and talk and say what was really, really on their minds. Had this really great spirit. And so when we announced that the convention was coming to Gary, the Post-Tribune almost collapsed. Right? Said no, you cannot bring all those Negroes here to the city of Gary. And first of all, where are they going to stay? Where are they going to stay? You got that one hotel, and that's it. I mean, it may have. Thank you. It may have 3 or 4 rooms, 3 or 400 rooms, but we're talking about thousands of people coming from all over the country. Where are they going to stay? And the people of Gary, so unbelievably, the people of Gary said, they can stay in my house.
That's right.
They can stay in my home. And that's wonderful. And so that's what we did. There would be 4 or 5 delegates who would stay with one family. Then another 4 or 5 would stay with another family. And so we accommodated, as I said, more than 10,000 people. Now, some of them did go all the way to Chicago to a hotel, and they would have to get up early in the morning to get back to Gary in time for the opening session. But most of those folks stayed with people right here in Gary, and the people of Gary were just magnificent. I mean, what they did, it was just unbelievable. And so we were able to accommodate them. And the next thing that was great, when Ben Chavis was talking about driving into Gary and seeing these streamers and banners across Broadway, and if you had gone out to West Side, you would have seen hundreds of vendors selling. You could buy anything out there. They were selling all kinds of things, posters, and it was really just beautiful. If you could have seen it, it was a situation where, for once, with all the problems that black people were having all over this country, but for once, they were comfortable. I mean, they were in a situation where they didn't worry. The guy says, well, you know, we were driving into town, and we didn't know where West Side was, and we saw a policeman, and we had a little debate whether we should ask the policeman, because usually if you do that, they will want to know what you're doing there. They want to search your car. They will do everything. And he said, we were amazed. So the policeman not only told us where it was, he took us there. He drove out to West Side, said, just follow me, and I'll show you where it is. So we had an incredible thing. One of the fears was that crime was just going to go through the roof. If you bring that many black people together in one place, you know the assumption was that crime was going to go through the roof. The reality is, and we looked at the statistics afterwards, crime went down in Gary that week. It actually it was lower than it normally was. Now, and I'll stop.
Take your time.
But the fact is that the goal was to come up with this agenda. Come up with this agenda in terms of what black people were going to be doing over the next 10 years. At that time, as I said, we had 10 black members of the United States Congress. So based upon our presence in the population, we decided that we should have at least 40. We should have at least 40 members of the Congress of the United States. Interesting. How many members, black members of the Congress, do we have today?
About 40, 41, 42, I believe.
We have 43.
Okay,
We
well,
have 43 black members of the United States Congress.
Wow.
So what we were seeing back in 1972, 40 years ago, has come to pass. It has come to pass in this country. You heard the mention of national health care for everyone. We were talking about that 40 years ago. It's sort of ahead of the whole country in that regard. So today, you have a black man sitting in the White House, and you have national health care in this country. Many of the things, if you go back and look at that agenda, many of the things that at the time were considered just outrageous, just, oh, those folks are crazy. They're talking about doing this. You're talking about the Palestinians and the Israelis coming together, living side by side with each other in peace. We were talking about that in that 72 convention. That was part of the black agenda. The numbers of people that has really exploded as a result of that convention can better be found at the local level. When you look at mayors, city councils, state representatives, I know the assumption now is, oh, we've always had it.
Right, now. It wasn't.
No, we haven't always had. We haven't always had that. I can remember around here that Jim, I'm trying to think of his name. He's from East Chicago, and he was a state senator, and he was the only state senator that we had around here. And yet, after the '72 convention, people who attended that convention were so inspired. They went back to their home cities and towns, and they jumped into electoral politics. And there was a good reason why that was the way to go at that point, because if you remember, after the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, that really sort of opened the door. That gave us an opportunity to run for these offices. But also, '68, Dr. King was killed. The civil rights movement, the marching, the demonstrating was really going against us at that time. When those cases, before 1965, when those cases reached the Supreme Court of the United States, the Supreme Court would usually rule with the demonstrators. They'd come out of Georgia, Mississippi with those cases. The Supreme Court would rule with the demonstrators. But all that changed in '65. When we got the right to vote, and the legal right to vote, then the court started taking a very different attitude towards marches and demonstrations. There was a march, Dick Gregory led a march over in Chicago around the mayor's house. And of course they arrested them all. But his case went to the Supreme Court of the United States. And up to that point, the Supreme Court had been saying, yeah, you have a right to demonstrate about civil rights and so forth. But the Supreme Court said in that case, they said, no, you were provoking people. They had been attacked by a white mob, and instead of them blaming the mob for attacking them, they said, no, you all provoked them, and therefore they ruled against Dick Gregory. So the courts were no longer, especially the upper courts, the appellate courts, the Supreme Court, they were no longer on our side. And so clearly we needed a new strategy. And that turned out to be moving into the electoral arena, running for public office. And if you can just think about this, and I'll close with this, but the fact is that slavery, even after we left slavery, there was a short period when we were able to be elected to public offices in the South up until 1876 approximately, when the compromise took place, and the compromise, in fact, put us back into slavery. And so we did not have representation in governmental bodies. We did not have legislators. We didn't have mayors. And what do elected officials do? They do a lot of things, but one of the things they do, they hand out contracts. They hand out money. They decide who gets the money, who gets the contract. And if you can just think about that, 100 years, we had nobody representing us. That money was going to other folks. It was not coming to us. And so if we look at the '72 convention as representing a beginning of a change in that regard, and our beginning to elect more and more people to public office, what that means is that more and more of us were moving into positions where we could control those contracts, where we could make sure that our community got jobs and got the benefit of those contracts. And so that was a huge change. That was a huge change, not just politically speaking, it was a huge change economically speaking. Now, we are in the process, it seems, of giving it all back.
Yep.
We don't seem to really realize what we have, and we seem to be in the process of giving it all back. I'm hoping that right here in Gary, right here in this area, that we will somehow, there will be some folks getting together and understanding what is possible and holding on to it and using it to leverage, to expand the good things in life that can come to our people. And I'm hoping that will happen. Sometimes I'm not so sure. But that's where we need to go. And the 1972 convention did represent an historical change. I teach out at Indiana University. Every year, I make it a point to put on the final exam, I put this question on the final exam. Where did the National Black Political Convention take place? In what city did the National Black Political Convention take place? And guess how many of the students that I have today get that question wrong?
0.
75.
Did someone say 75?
Yes, sir.
So, about 75% of them. I mean, and many of them live in Gary. They live in Gary.
75% didn't know. Didn't know. Did not
Pardon?
know. 75% did not know.
75% did not know
Wrong.
that the National Black Political Convention in 1972 took place in Gary.
Oh, Lord.
And let me tell you, at the beginning of the semester, I always say something about that. I said, well, that's history. I said, it's there. And now, just one other quick thing. If you go out to Westside High School, we all know where Westside High School is. And if you walk into that gymnasium, which is the room that you just saw in this film, if you're a student at Westside High School, and you walk all around that gymnasium, go up in the bleachers and down the aisles, and just walk all over there, you will see not a single indication that one of the most historic events in the history of this country and certainly in the history of our people took place in that room.
Lord, have mercy.
Nothing. There's nothing there to even say, well, yeah, a few people came together here, 40 years ago, and they had a meeting. And that is one of the things I blame myself for that. I blame our officials for that. At the very least, they could get just a little plaque, Reverend, and put up there and say, in March of 1972, this is what happened in this room. But we have reached such a point that we don't think it's even important enough to do that. And yet, I see some of our elected officials today, they wouldn't be elected officials today if that meeting had not taken place. They would not hold those offices they have. So at the very least, one of the things we have to learn, Aretha Franklin said it best, but we have to learn to respect ourselves. Mm-hmm. We really do. And in some way, marking that event, that historic event in that room, in that building, would be a way of respecting ourselves a little more than we do today. I'll stop there, Reverend.